These class of two cruisers were one of the best ever to be built by America. They were both built in the 1930s, even though one ship would be undoubtedly more famous than the other. I am Michael Benitez, and today we'll be talking about a class of two heavy cruisers of the United States Navy. One encountered several rescue operations, while the other suffered a fate on herself. I am Michael Benitez, and today we'll be talking about the story of the Portland class cruisers. Let's begin the story of this yet probably unknown class, other than one of the sisters. The late 1920s. America is now part of the Treaty of 1922, which meant that all major navies that won World War I, America and her allies, would have limited ships in their navies, not to overpower the other. So, America wanted to build cruisers that were up to this type. So, several classes of ships were built. The first, built after the Washington Naval Treaty in 1922, and the first of the treaty cruisers, as they were called at that time, was the Pensacola class, concluding of two ships, Pensacola and Salt Lake City. These were the first heavy cruisers of this type. The second group of treaty cruisers was the Northampton class, which consisted of 6 ships, along with Northampton herself. But America wanted one more ship to add this type of cruiser. So, the United States Navy decided to build a third class of treaty cruisers that were based off both the designs of USS Pensacola and USS Northampton. This new class would consist of five heavy cruisers. These ships were named the Portland class. As I said earlier, the Portland class of cruisers were were modifications of both Pensacola and Northampton, and this class would consist of 5 ships. Portland and her sisters were originally designed as light cruisers, giving them the hull symbol CL. However, in 1931, they were then classified as CA, heavy cruisers. However, the class of ship had pretty different ways about their lives of how they started. Fiscal year 1930. As I said before, there were supposed to be 5 Portland-class cruisers, named CA-32, classified CA-32, CA-33, CA-34, CA-35, and CA-36. However, CA-32, CA-34, and CA-36 were then converted. They were now New Orleans-class cruisers. CA-32 became USS New Orleans, the lead ship in her own class. CA-34 became USS Astoria, the lead ship of her own class before it became the New Orleans class. And CA-36 became USS Minneapolis. 3 ships have been converted into New Orleans class cruisers. However, 2 ships did make it into the final design of the Portland class. Those 2 ships would happen to be the lead ship of the class herself, USS Portland. Then there was CA-35. She would be the most famous of the sisters, and her name may remember you that I did a video earlier on my channel of this ship. This ship would be known as a ship of pure power and saw conclusive service in World War II. However, she was lost to a horrifying fate and was almost completely forgotten. This is the story. The CA-35 was now named USS Indianapolis. The armaments for Indianapolis and Portland were quite simple. Here you can see here how many guns they had. And trust me, they were pretty powerful, even though they were supposed to be light cruisers, but in fact became heavy cruisers. However, something was a bit odd about this class. Indianapolis was built first, not Portland. Construction began on Indianapolis in 1930, and she was completed and commissioned by 1932. While Portland, even though started construction in 1932, the same year as her sister, 1930, the same year as her sister, she wasn't completed until 1933, which makes her a year younger than Indianapolis. Which is kind of strange, the fact that this class was called the Portland class, not the Indianapolis class. But, who cares? At least there were 2 ships of this class built, while the other 3 were converted into New Orleans class cruisers. These 2 were the only ships of the Portland class, and trust me, they had a lot of things happen in their careers. After taking her shakedown cruise, Indianapolis was put in the service and underwent several training operations in the Panama Canal and other parts of the Pacific and Atlantic. And on 2 occasions she would make a tour of the seas with the president at the time, President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt. While Portland, well, let's just say Portland did not have a very good start to her service. After a trip to Boston, she went to New York Harbor on April 3rd, 1930s. However, the next evening in 1933, April 4th, Portland would commence a rescue operation. On April 4th, 1933, Portland was called off the coast of New Jersey to rescue any surviving crew members of the USS Akron, an airship built for the U.S. Navy. She had crashed during a storm. Portland was the first to arrive on the scene, but despite her efforts, 73 out of the 76 people aboard Akron were killed, along with Admiral William Moffett. Only 3 had survived. This was one of several rescue operations Portland would conceive during her career. Just like her older sister, Portland would also take a trip with Franklin D. Roosevelt, this time in 1935. During this time, Indianapolis was the flagship of Scouting Fleet 1. On December 7th, 1941, the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Indianapolis was doing a mock bombardment of the Johnson Atoll in Japan, where she got the message of the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was then immediately put in Task Force 12 to find the carriers responsible for the attack, but with no success. She was then put in Task Force 11. Portland was in a group escorting the carrier USS Lexington. However, once the attack on Pearl Harbor had happened, she was taken back for more patrol duties from 1941 to 1942. However, she would see an extensive service in the Battle of the Coral Sea. Indianapolis would be in extensive service in the New Guinea and Aleutian campaigns of 1942. Portland would conduct serious battles, unlike her sister. During the Battle of the Coral Sea, Portland, along with other cruisers, would shelter the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown, the lead ship of her own class. However, a few days later, USS Lexington, one of the first ever aircraft carriers ever to be built for the U.S. Navy, was destroyed and lost. Portland took on 722 of her men, while suffering no casualties herself. That same year, during the Battle of Midway, Portland would also take on survivors of another destroyed aircraft carrier, that being USS Yorktown, who had been destroyed by bombs and 2 torpedoes. She also sank. In 1943, Indianapolis would conduct serious amphibious bombardments in 1943, and at that same year, she became an ultimate dream when she became the flagship of Raymond A. Spruance of the Fifth Fleet. Indianapolis was the flagship of the fleet. Portland was had to taken into dry dock in Sydney in 1942 due to a torpedo attack in the naval battle of Guadalcanal. And in January 1944, Indianapolis would conduct the most successful operation of her life. She was involved in D-Day, bombarding the shores and helping the soldiers capture the enemy territory. Indianapolis is most famous for this point. However, she is also most famous for something else. But I'll get to that in a minute. Throughout 1944, along with the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Indianapolis would shot down several enemy Japanese planes. In that same year, Portland would be involved in the battle. Of the Leyte Gulf, the most successful battle in World War II, in which, during the Battle of the Sargasso Sea, she would destroy the Japanese cruiser Morigami. We reached 1945. And we reached the end of the USS Indianapolis. Just like in 1944, the year earlier, Indianapolis, also known as Indy, would conduct several bombardments and shut down several planes during the first few months of 1945. In 1945, Portland was captured in this famous picture along with Pennsylvania, Colorado, Louisville, and Columbia in Lagahin Gulf. However, this was the year that Portland lost her sister. She would be conducting bombardments, while her sister would take on a serious mission. It was the 24th of March, 1945. Indianapolis was doing bombardments off Okinawa, when suddenly her lookout spotted a plane bearing down on her. They tried to shoot it down, but it was too late. The enemy plane was damaged, and the pilot crashed the plane into Indianapolis herself off her port stern, slicing through several decks. It would be after this that Indianapolis had taken on a secret mission. In that attack, Indy lost 9 men, while 9 more were taken in San Francisco. However, at this point, Indianapolis was put on a secret mission, a mission that would seal her fate. And in April 1945, she was sent out on a secret mission to take some parts to Tinian, while her crew didn't even know what was on board. Indy's captain at this time was Captain Charles B. McVeigh. He was a senior and was respected well by his crew. It was also this time that Indy was still the flagship of the Fifth Fleet, even though she was still undergoing repairs. Portland will be still conducting bombardments, but what was the secret mission Indianapolis had to take on? The crew didn't know it, but Indy was carrying the parts of Little Boy, the atomic bomb that will be launched on Hiroshima. Two radioactive specialists, which were on board at this time, were conducted as just being spies to see if anything happened. They were in charge of the parts being delivered to Tinian. However, Captain McVeigh himself did say that he thought something had to do with Operation Manhattan. On the 16th of July, 1945, Indy sets off on her final voyage, carrying the parts for Little Boy to the island of Tinian. She made a stop over at Pearl Harbor. However, on this voyage, she will be unescorted. The events later will be controversial and deadly. After delivering the parts safely to Tinian, Indianapolis was given a new job. She would be sent to Guam for another training operation for the invasion of Japan, along with the sister Portland, who would be conducting the same thing. This is the last known picture of the Indianapolis, also known as Indy. But in her path was the Japanese submarine I-58. When these two crossed their paths, One would survive, the other would not. The decision between life and death. On July 29th, 1945, a lookout on I-58 spots an unknown ship. Her captain thought it was a New Mexico battleship USS Idaho. She is, in fact, the USS Indianapolis. The captain orders 6 torpedoes to be shot at Indy. Indy's crew does not know what's about to happen next. At 00:15 hours on July 29th, 1945, USS Indianapolis is hit by 2 Japanese torpedoes. Captain McVeigh, who was asleep at the time, calls in general quarters. He thinks he can save Indy. However, it is too late. Indy's bow has been completely destroyed by the 2 torpedoes. There is nothing he can do to save his ship. He has to give the order to abandon ship. Many people are killed in flash fires, explosions, or either just jumping off the ship, or being killed far below in the bowels of Indy. Soon, Indy's fate will be done for. Some of her crew were not even dressed at the time of the explosions. There was nothing they could do. Indy was sinking fast. In less than 10 minutes, she was almost completely underwater. Then, 12 minutes after the torpedo struck, USS Indianapolis, the Portland-class cruiser, also known as Indy, the flagship of the Fifth Fleet, was dead. In just 12 minutes, Indianapolis was gone, leaving hundreds of her men stranded in the water. However, the worst was yet to come. Even though she had sunk, nobody actually knew of her sinking, even though many people claimed they have received Indianapolis' distress signal. It was then they learned 4 days later due to the Catalina plane. Before that, the crew had to survive 4 days of ultimate terror as they were eaten by sharks, killed by each other, or hallucinations. Even hallucination of the Indy herself. Many people didn't survive those 4 days in the ocean. When rescue finally came, at 3.5 days later after the sinking, there were only 316 out of the 1,195 people aboard Indy that night. Captain McVeigh was one of her survivors. After the sinking of his ship, Captain McVeigh would receive numerous controversials saying that he was the fault for the sinking of the Indianapolis, even though he was told under restriction not to zigzag, even while in safe conditions. This was due to the bomb that was carrying aboard Indianapolis. It was top secret. That means Indy had no escort, no destroyer to save her from I-58. Even Captain Hashimoto of I-58 did say that if there were invasive maneuvers, Indy wouldn't have survived. After the sinking, Captain McVeigh would receive numerous death threats from the family members of those who died. Even though he would be exonerated of any claim in 1996, Captain McVeigh didn't get to see it. On the 6th of November 1968, he shot himself, faced with depression of losing his wife and the death threats he had been receiving from many of the family members of those who died. But what happened to Portland, Indianapolis' younger sister? Portland was witness to the Japanese surrender in 1945. However, after the war, she was decommissioned. It was unknown what to do with her, and she was not saved as a museum ship. In the 1960s, Portland was scrapped. Portland's mast and bridge shield is on display at Fort Allen Park, a last remember of USS Portland and her sister, USS Indianapolis, most famous of the two. Indy's wreck was not discovered until 2018 by Paul Allen, the inventor of software. By her sailors, Portland was known as Sweet Pea. As I mentioned before, Indianapolis was known as Indy by her crew. Indy will be more famous than Portland. However, she has almost been forgotten. But hopefully, many people have been remembered Indianapolis, as with the movie USS Indianapolis, Man of Courage, starring Nicolas Cage as Captain McVeigh. Portland was scrapped in 1962, not ever seeing a chance of becoming a museum ship, and the loss of her oldest sister. Hopefully, you'll remember the Portland-class cruisers, USS Portland, known as Sweet Pea, and the most famous USS Indianapolis, known as Indy. Hopefully you remember these two ships as two ships of mighty power and strength. Indianapolis was the flagship of several fleets, while Portland, she was involved in several rescue operations, but not one to save the crew of her oldest sister. I am Mike Benitez signing out on the story of two very unique and one famous ship, USS Portland and USS Indianapolis, the Portland class of heavy cruisers. Thank you very much for watching this video.